along with us. We've got a lot to cover, so it's good to see you all here. Superintendent Klosky, would you like to kick off with the proposed agenda? Or?
So we have several topics that the school and city leadership team have been discussing, and they are listed on our agenda, and I know they're listed on the city special meeting agenda as well. The first topic has been somewhat of an ongoing topic, but I think there is maybe some ease with that at this point. The school-based counselors is the first topic, and I know that each of the entities, the school board directors and the city councils, have both received the public statement, the press release that was joint statement from the Mercer Island Schools Foundation and the MIYFS Foundation regarding their efforts to fill the planned reduction that would be for the 1920 school year. So I know that there is a temporary solution that precludes the conversation, at least for 1920.
And if I can add to that, the council had directed staff at their annual planning session to obviously come back with a short-term funding solution. So we were very delighted and very pleased to see the foundation come and provide this incredibly generous offer to support the 1920 academic school year. It was phenomenal. We weren't expecting it. It really helps the city cover that. And then I am looking to bring back for the council's consideration for next Tuesday evening, looking at some expenditure savings that we always have some amount of expenditure savings, and looking at that for covering at least the additional biennium. So at least through the end of 20. Does that make sense? The end of, yes, the end of the calendar year. So that will be presented to council next week. So we think we're in good shape there. I would add the council, of course, also directed the staff to come up with a long-term solution, but there is, I want to recognize there is I would call it a community-based coalition that's formed together after the failure of Prop 1 to really talk about this problem of continued funding for our school counselors. And so they're really have convened, they're really taken this up. And so one of the requests that have come from them is to do with the council a joint study session. And we're excited to hear what is their proposed idea for solving this long term. So, they have ideas about solving this for the long term. And so I think now is the time to really start talking about that. I'd love to hear their idea, and I'm sure the council will. And it hopefully feeds really nicely into the engagement process that we have designed for the fiscal sustainability plan. I know we'll talk about that a little bit later, but I think it all times really nicely. And so with council's approval and concurrence, we'll get that study session set up. Would love to have you, invited and participated in some way, because obviously this impacts our partnership with the school district. So. Any questions or?
Julie, can you clarify? So we're going to have a session on Tuesday night, special meeting that is almost entirely dedicated basically to YFS.
It's morphed into more items, unfortunately.
Okay. But predominantly, I think the topic that most people in the community are going to be interested in is YFS. And one of the elements will be a discussion of this donation. Can you help me understand, is this something that the council needs to formally accept? What is the process for acting on this particular very generous offer?
You do. You might recall the foundation often gives the city one-time funding for special projects. For example, we're going to talk about Dr. Luther's work. You had to accept those funds to actually and then that gets appropriated within the YFS budget. So you do have to actually accept those funds, and so we are hoping you will in fact do that on Tuesday night and give us direction to move forward with a budget adjustment.
Great. That's excellent
know.
news.
We have a short-term plan.
Yes. And it does segue nicely, the work around youth and family services and mental health within our schools and our city district partnerships to talk about Dr. Luthar and the work that's happening there. Yeah.
So I think we're going to ask Cindy to come up and talk a little bit about the Dr. Luthar's work and the partnership that YFS and the school district had in supporting this.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I hope you could. I hope a lot of you were able to attend one of her presentations. It was really interesting. They're all a little bit different because they were geared toward different audiences, but she presented her data. So, as Julie alluded to, this was some of the funds from the foundation, and we specifically work with her because she surveys youth in high-achieving schools. So those are schools where the SAT scores are 75th to 98th percentile, and they're public or private. And so she looks at those kids because they're often in affluent communities, but maybe some of the risk factors for that group of people is different. So that's why we wanted some data on our kids through her. So she came here. She did a great presentation. She spoke with the teachers that day to go over what she saw, because a lot of the data that she covers is on their peers, on their perceptions of school, parents, and then the school setting. And then she really outlines for them what are our risk factors. And then within the behaviors that maybe we should think about, she looks at what groups within that behavior are more at risk. So you would have male, female, non-binary, and then you would have different ethnicity or races. And so she would say, some of your kids in these groups are doing better, but you might want to pay more attention to these. So it will really help us take a look at the data and then target in and see if we should think about how to have an impact on some of those scores. So she presented here. Right now, we've looked at the data in some debriefs in-house at the YFS. I know that the school has as well, and then we're gonna get together over the next week or two to look at this data juxtaposed to all of the other data that we have to see where we should hone in, where should we really key in, and from that, for us at YFS, it will go into our strategic planning for prevention. So what should we be doing with kids, maybe at the peer level? What should we be doing with families? What should we be doing in the community? What messaging should be out there? And then what can we offer to parents? So it's going to affect our prevention programming. I know the school will do something with theirs, and then we'll make her data and her presentation available to other youth-serving entities, because really we want to make sure that everybody has it. I think the one really positive aspect of working with her is, I think she'll say things very bluntly and plainly about your community. And I think they're all things that we know, right? Even though she'll say them like that, but she really does have respect for our community. In fact, I have to tell you, she really thought that it was a community that could come around this issue more than other communities she saw. She said, I'd really like to, we're really looking to partner with her to do brief intervention surveys for consecutive years for a while, so you can get a trends and you can watch that dashboard. But she really said, I really hope that you'll stick with us so we can really highlight how a community comes around it, because you have people who don't hold territory, and you work well together. So she said a lot of good things about that. We did well in a lot of the areas, a lot of the social emotional learning our kids were doing very well in. There were some risk factors like there are everywhere, but nothing stood out as like, oh my God, you have a huge problem here. So that was really nice to hear too. So we'll keep you posted, and we'll keep you posted on our prevention work. And you've applied for some grants to do this because our HYI funding went away for a while. So it's something that's in the works and is an ongoing part of YFS. So, yeah. And if you want to see the presentation, please ask Dawn and her staff or me. If you weren't able to make it, we have it recorded.
I believe at least one of our presentations was also shared on social media, maybe through the school district or the website.
No, I think it was just a summary. Jump in.
I was reaching too. We're looking at ways that we can share it the best we can. We had put it up there. There are some data points that are where the N is so small that we do have to worry about suppression of information. And so we're trying to think about what's the best way to present it. But in terms of her overall presentation, I think the raw data is the thing that we're most sensitive to, and Cindy, you and I have talked about that. Yeah. But the video itself, we are looking for ways of what's the best way to make that available. Right now, as people request it, we're giving it to them. We're just trying to also be thoughtful about, this is community information, and how much do we want out there for everyone versus the community groups, as you had mentioned, Cindy.
Yeah.
I think what would be helpful maybe is if you could just articulate some of the most important points that you think came out in the context of the youth on the island. But equally, I think she had some insights in terms of where she thought that the district and the city through YFS could also partner. And I think that would be interesting, sort of where is it we might go? If we are a hopeful, or she's hopeful for us, what does that mean, and what does that look like? What's our call to action?
Are you saying that, Mayor Bertlin, in the long run, keep us posted on that?
Well, I think for short term,
impressions?
Tonight, I think it would be great because not everybody had the opportunity to go to one or multiple of those. So maybe just, what are the top 3 takeaways we have with regard to the youth? You mentioned that, she was optimistic about the community as a whole and our ability to rally. If you could elaborate just a little bit more on that, it would be interesting.
Yeah. Let me see. Fred or Donna, does anything come to mind? Were you shaking your head? Yeah.
Go ahead, Donna.
I think for us, when we debriefed on it, certainly it was centered at the high school. It was our high school youth that were surveyed, and our high school team, our high school staff got to work with Dr. Luther in the morning. But as we were doing some of the analysis of that data along with the other data points as a leadership team with all of our school sites, I think we realized that it would be good for our entire team, including our elementary principals, to analyze that work and perhaps have the opportunity to work with Dr. Luther in some capacity as a leadership team. So we can all hear the same things, because even though it's focused on our adolescents, there's that whole pathway that comes before with our younger students as well. So that was a aha for us as to how do we work with our students, of course, through all the grades, but then naturally our parents as well.
Kind of building on that, one of the things that she expressed concern about in our community is competition, particularly amongst girls, as it came out, but those were elevated rates in terms of this sense that everyone is trying to go to the same place, and that tends to be in these elite colleges. And so in order to get there, if I know there's only a certain amount of spots available, what does that do to the competition amongst students? And it leads to some unhealthy conflict. That was one area. Another one that stood out for me was just this sense of, she called it meanness. And it's not just student to student, it's adult to adult and adult to student as well. And whether or not that's meanness from parents towards students, or teachers and educators towards students, or it's parents towards educators, she picked up on some of that through not just her research, but also her qualitative information. So those were 2 things that stood out for me about, wow, these are things that we need to really be thinking about as we're moving forward. From a school perspective, I think we were concerned by a bubble graph that showed that students felt like they had teachers they could go to in the school, they had coaches they could go to in the school, they had counselors they could go to in the school, but there was a big bubble for nobody. And that's in Ruby Payne's work, which isn't part of this, but she did a lot of her work in communities of poverty. And she said, one of the number one things that you need is every kid to feel connected in their school to somebody, whether that's a custodian or someone. So that's something we're thinking about. But when I place that in the context of, well, what do students in poverty have to do with students in schools of affluence? Something else that resonated with me with Dr. Luthar, she said, there are basically 4 main risk factors. Donna, help me out with the 4th. I always forget it. You have students in poverty. You have students who have been like ACEs. Trauma. You've got students in highly affluent communities like this. And what's the 4th?
Discrimination.
Thank
Students
you.
who are exposed to extreme discrimination.
So we fit in that demographic, and we have to pay attention that these do impact our students. So those are some things that stood out for me.
That was really part of the call to action. That he's referencing the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. That really just those are the 4 risk group factors for kids in the United States that we need to pay attention to. I think it's also worth noting that she saw it really healthy that of the 2 highest groups that youth go to, it was the counselors at the high school, mental health counselors, and teachers. They were really neck and neck, and she thought that was really indicative of an environment that both sides welcome the kids. I have to tell you, a lot of adults left that room saying, I'm going to go reach out to 5 kids. It was really, you can see the adults, when we have this data, it really helps us to think about what we need to do and where we need to focus. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other follow-up questions or discussion? All right, not seeing any, then we can move on to our next City Financial Sustainability Plan and Potential Impacts.
Where to start?
I know. I'm just going to summarize really quickly. As part of the Proposition 1 ordinance, the council included in there that we were going to embark on developing a fiscal sustainability plan. So just like you have to do multi-year projections, we by state law have to do a 6-year projection, and we were projecting structural imbalance, structural deficit. So I think in that context, developing a plan that would actually address that for the long term. So we retained management partners. They were the firm that also reviewed the forecasting, our forecasting model back in last summer, and confirmed that we have a model that's really reasonable. And so based on that work, using that work as the foundation, they embarked on, goodness, what did they do? I think they met with every single council member, every single department head, and really tried to identify strategies. And the strategies fit into, I would say, 4 areas. One is around, service delivery model changes, revenue enhancements, as well as reductions. And then from there, they also then crafted what they're calling, we call them scenario A, B, and C. So scenario A, so all of the scenarios include some level of continued reductions, even though the fact is they've put already into the fiscal plan the 2.7 in reductions already made. Regardless, there's more reductions we have to make. So the first scenario was more kind of if you were looking on balancing the 6 years with more revenues. The B scenario is a balance of revenues and reductions, and then the third scenario is reductions. And so where we're at, I think in conversations with the council when the consultant was here presenting, obviously it was the first time they just saw this on April 16th, and we're still digesting it. The council has asked the staff to come back and really, what's the staff's assessment? What's the staff's evaluation of? Is this really feasible? I mean, there are very serious and I would say significant work if some of the strategies were to be adopted. So, so the staff will provide that. I think we're teeing that up for the council has a mid-year planning session on June 21st. So we're teeing that up for the council to review that with the staff. So that from there, we're hoping we can engage the council and really nail down the engagement process. What I proposed, I've been 2 summers here, and the summers really are kind of dead on Mercer Island. I mean, I know for me, that's the only time my kids are free, and so I want to go and vacation with my family, and it's a quieter time. And so what I recommended was, let's make that process, we need to have the process, but let's have it more online. Have it more of an online, and we'll use our platform, Let's Talk, really engage the public on that. So, and then in the fall, we will invite our consultants back for a couple of town halls, and again engage our public more face-to-face in the fall when people are kind of back from their summer vacations. And then it was very obvious that we have 5 seats up, and I think the council recognizes maybe, and I certainly do, that we really take the time to engage the community. And obviously the council has a lot of influence on the process, but maybe that future council, that's the governing body that will really have to, one, I think, adopt the plan and oversee the plan's implementation. So I think, I feel like the council was okay with that approach, and but bear in mind, there's still a lot of work I've outlined for the council to do in this calendar year regarding our finances. So one of the things that the fiscal sustainability plan, which I think relates to, you have pointed out a number of strategies that could impact the district. We want to talk with the district about that regarding, say, ball fields and how we manage those going forward. There was a recommendation of eliminating some specialty programs in our police department, such as the SRO. So that has an impact on the district. So I do think this is kind of the beginning of that conversation and how we manage that. Of course, the fiscal sustainability plan also recommends that the general fund no longer support the YFS fund. We can't. The general fund just is hurting in a very severe and very real way. So for us to continue that, I just think it's going to be difficult when we are going to be faced with maybe potential cuts in public safety and more cuts in Parks and Rec. So the idea there is we really working with YFS to find a way to sustain YFS outside of the general fund. So that's it in a nutshell.
I think I would emphasize that the horizon here is, basically 4-6 years in terms of, policy and implementation. So what you will see is, first of all, not a knee-jerk reaction, because this is deep, this is serious when you're talking about your fire infrastructure, your police infrastructure, your youth and family services, et cetera. It has to be very thoughtfully done, engagement with the community. But equally, what we're trying to do is largely tee up a lot of this work for the next council, and arguably the council after that as well, because the next budgeting process will take place, hard to believe, just over a year from now. And they'll be facing some pretty tough numbers. The council that is seated 2 years thereafter, it will be even more intense, shall we say, barring any unforeseen circumstances. So this isn't about what happens next January. This is about how we look at, and that's why it's called sustainability. It's got a medium to long-term horizon, and I think that's very important for the public to understand in terms of the importance of weighing in and working with council and us having this open dialogue with the school board and the schools community, because you can, just as Julie has mentioned, there's some very real impacts that could be coming our way.
Just a quick follow-up on the question of the dialogue or conversations between the district and the city. Have you guys set up times to meet? Because there are, as Julie, as you mentioned, specific strategies that affect both the district and the city. And so I'm just curious whether or not actual meetings have been set up and whether or not on a staff-to-staff level there's those discussions going on.
Because we are so interconnected, certainly via our interlocals, but staff meets regularly. Julie and I meet regularly. Cindy and Derek and Fred meet regularly. Our maintenance and operations department meets regularly. In lots of discussions as well. So we haven't set up a specific meeting to discuss the sustainability plan, but in our regular meetings, we have all discussed the sustainability plan. So yes, it is an ongoing conversation for staff. The one piece that wasn't mentioned that we do have to acknowledge as well is the pool, because of that being a shared facility and interlocal as well. So that involves another management group also. So that's one more piece of the puzzle.
I just wanted to clarify, because of what you said, the policy direction of the general fund support for YFS is going to be discussed at the 4:30 meeting. So that was, I guess, floated as an idea at our planning session, along with general fund cuts that we since adopted, but we haven't got to that 4:30 discussion that would be the policy direction on that. So just so that everybody comes.
Well, and I'm glad you pointed out, because obviously to manage the short-term gap funding, the general fund is having to come up with that. So, all right.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, then we'll move on to our next area.
Actually, I will say thank you for making it transparent and thinking about future councils as you proceed through this. I think the communication across the different councils and such is very, very important. When we did the school bonds, there was a 2012 school board, a 2014 school board, a 2016 school board, and a 2018 school board, all involved in building the schools we have here. And, steadfast focus, understanding of the plan across all those different boards, and communication that could be reviewed by the different boards to make sure that they're following the plan as initially thought of, was super, super important towards that succeeding and being on time and on budget. So that was a number of councils. I think you're going to probably have something similar too. So thank you very much for being thoughtful about that. Much appreciated.
And just quickly, I mentioned this at our superintendent community advisory meeting earlier this week, but just really want to thank the city staff for brainstorming and problem solving, specifically with regards to making sure that our kids are impacted as little as possible. My example was I was a little bit distraught when I saw that the all-island track meet was not going to happen, as that's a great tradition for our elementary school students, and know that Jessie Bond and Becky Shadow with the Boys and Girls Club have worked together to find a solution for that and fill that gap. So I know that's a lot of work on the staff's part, and so I just want to thank you I know other things are happening too. That's just the one that I happened to just find out about. And it's obviously a natural partnership, as they've both always been involved in that. So thank you for that. And, we, as members of the community, want to make sure that the negative impacts are as little as possible. And we certainly, or at least I can speak for myself, but look forward to problem solving and seeing what we can do to improve our community together.
So does that mean the all-island track meet is on? Because I know West Mercer, which has won for many, many years, was thinking they were going to retire the victors in the small bright spot.
No, Island Park will get their turn. It's back on.
Okay.
I graduated, so.
In discussing financial impacts and sustainability and these things, a question has come up a couple of times, both at the City Council and within the school board, has been our school impact fees. How are those calculated? How are those worked? What are the complexities to that? So we thought we would put it for a discussion topic on our agenda here tonight.
I think it might be wise to start with Ty giving a very brief and not complex description of impact fees and how they work here on Mercer Island.
Good evening. So impact fees are a way for cities and districts to recoup some of the cost of expanding infrastructure as a city grows or as a community grows. There's usually two mechanisms that you can do that with. You can do it through mitigation fees and impact fees. Impact fees are slightly more structured. There's a set rate. Everybody who gets a permit, has to pay that rate. Mitigation fees are more of we come to the city gives us a list of permit holders, we track down the permit holders. They have to file a SEPA, which is an environmental impact document, and we have to assess based on all the different documentation how much the fee is. So impact fees are a much cleaner, consistent way of recouping some of the cost of adding infrastructure to house these students. The formula is regulated by RCW and is a very unique formula. It relies heavily on the cost of previous projects that have been built to house students, anticipated growth of students, students that are housing permits that are built within the district that affects those projects that have already been built. There's a number of factors, but the biggest factors is enrollment and the cost of expansion. So we are getting ready to start working on that for this year. It is a 6-year capital facility plan. It's called a 6-year plan, but it's a pretty much a requirement that we have to update it annually to make sure that we are capturing students that are coming in and making sure that we have accurate assumptions, and B, as we discovered this last year as we were looking at enrollment, the middle school expansion had to roll off simply because the enrollment trend at the middle school wasn't expanding to justify keeping that project in the impact fee. So it is very much based on enrollment trends and projections, and we have to keep those current and annual. So as we are preparing to update the plan for this year, we'll be taking a look at our enrollment and making sure that we have all the appropriate factors considered. And we will be bringing the impact fee plan to the school board June 13th.
In June, yeah.
For the first reading and the second reading on the 27th. Any questions?
Can you tell me what is the frequency in which you must update your calculation of the impact fee? And then is that coinciding at the high end, low end, mid range of the frequency you've been doing it?
It is an annual update based on we project enrollment annually, and we compare it against demographers. Dr. Les Kendrick, he's the demographer that the district uses. So we benchmark our enrollment projections against his projections. So as we annually project forward, we keep a rolling 5-year average of enrollment projections. We tend to try to keep the enrollment on an annual basis. I mean, as we get closer to the actual school year, we do modify some of our assumptions a little bit just to, make sure that our budget is as close as possible. We don't want to over-project or under-project staffing. So we do monitor enrollment very closely towards the end of the school year. Right now it's almost 3-4 times a week we sit down and we say, all right, what's the kindergarten numbers looking like? Or what's the high school going to look like? So we do monitor it very closely, but in terms of updating the plan and the assumptions within the plan, it is an annual process. And we need to, part of the reason why we have to do it annually and have to have it as a 6-year plan is the legal requirement to have a plan adopted in order to use impact fees. So the impact fees that we've collected, we have to use them for expansion programs or expansion projects. If we need to put a portable down in one of the buildings that will be funded mainly through the impact fees that we've collected. In order to use that, we have to have a plan, and we have to use impact fees within 10 years. So the 6-year plan kind of falls within that range. So we keep updating the assumptions on an annual basis for the plan, but in terms of monitoring enrollment, it is we monitor enrollment on a monthly basis, but projecting enrollment, we do it throughout the year.
So the RCW requires the impact fee to be recalculated based on that 6-year capitals every year, annually?
Yes. We do have to calculate it, and there will eventually be some year where we don't have an impact fee. I mean, enrollment in communities ebbs and flows with economies and size and a host of factors. So there will be times where we won't have an impact fee, but we will have to update the plan on an annual basis to ensure that we have that financing plan for projected expansion based on the enrollment projections in order to be able to use impact fees as the need arises.
Ty, just because, calendar year versus school year, I just want to make sure I understand. Okay, so you guys are going to, in your June 30 meeting, are you looking to perhaps adopt new impact fees? And when do those new impact fees go into effect? In January 1, 2020, or?
Yes. So we will be adopting our plan in June, the end of June 2019. We submit it to the city. Historically, I think you guys have adopted it or accepted the plan in August, I believe.
I think it's been later than that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's been later than normal.
As soon as we get it.
Yeah, as soon as you get it. And then that fee goes into the next year.
So can you remind people a couple factors? First of all, this is for net new units, or this is for if I scrape one house and build another one. So it's net new units.
So part of the calculation that we have to look at is net new construction. So when we are figuring out the cost, it's a shared cost. So every new student that comes in, every new permit that is built, we have to look at whether it's a net new construction or if it's just a rebuild. So if you scrape one house down and you build one house, that doesn't count. If you scrape one down and build two, then that second house on the lot would count towards the impact fee calculation.
And the second factor, just as a reminder, this is for expansion. This is not for maintaining or rehabilitating existing capacity, right?
Yes, this is for expansion only.
Great, because those are the questions that I frequently get. Wanted to make sure I was answering them
And
right.
just the other side of that coin is on the multifamily side, you're looking at the contribution of multifamily units to new student enrollment, and then you're ascribing a ratio that
Yeah.
then gets assigned to new multifamily.
Yeah.
And that has a separate impact fee that is distinct from single-family residential.
Yeah, single family and multifamily are different in so much as it's the number of units and then the families that are attached per.
Bedroom, isn't it?
Not necessarily bedroom. It's actual housing units within that development or that building. So it is a very different. It's not a different calculation, but it is separated out. They are distinct.
And the council has a role in this process. So just as a reminder, obviously, the board of directors passes it. It goes to the city council. You're the legislative body that actually has to then also adopt it before it can then be implemented. And it's usually more or less at this point, I would call it kind of a administrative, pass-through type of process. So have we been able to put it on consent? I'm wondering. I don't think we can because it's an ordinance. So, yeah.
I'd say towards that end, because we get it in June, and I think sometimes it's come up to the city in November. Yeah, I encourage the city council or the city to look at our June conversations, because we ask a bunch of questions in terms of clarifying questions about the numbers, and I don't know if we've ever had to come back. But that's kind of the good time to go through it, because once it comes back to November, if there's some changes that are going to make some changes, then it has to go through the whole process again. So towards that end, if you could kind of watch the meetings on June, that would be helpful.
Any other questions or comments? Impact fees. Okay,
Yeah,
so-
sorry, real quickly. I think there was, in the multifamily case, there was a situation with one-bedroom homes that aren't included in the calculation. Was that correct?
As I recall it, isn't it a function of number of bedrooms in terms of the
Yeah.
units?
I'd have to
so.
do some more
Yeah.
research.
Because
I don't know. off
that
the
was
top of
my
head.
recollection, was somehow it
Yeah.
did matter because they associated number of bedrooms with number of kids.
Family.
And of course, they had to, like 0.5 of a kid, which I'm not sure how you do, but, and then it rolled into your massive formula somehow.
Yeah.
It
I'll
did
have to
at
do
one
some
point,
additional
but then
research,
maybe
yeah.
it got averaged out,
Yeah.
so I forget.
So still one lingering question. All right, excellent. Anything else on that one? No, okay, so in our last little bit of time, for over a year, the school board and the governing team has been involved in looking at a detailed review of our mission, vision, and values, which is currently on a roadshow. So we have an update on that, but also the board and governance team is embarking on a long-term facilities plan, and we're in the beginning stages of that. So we thought this would be a good time for that update.
So we'll start with the core values, vision, and mission draft. And what I've put up here for you is the draft as the board has worked on. This is encompassed in their board policy 2020. And so the board worked in several study sessions to strategic plan, look out to the future, and worked on what really are the core values, and then drafting a vision statement and a mission statement. And I think some in this room, Debbie, maybe have you participated? We're getting input on these statements, each one of them individually using, Jesse's participated, that's who's participated, on each of these statements using a program called Thought Exchange. And Thought Exchange isn't just a survey, it's not just a one-way communication tool, it is a digital tool, but it's where people can share their thoughts, that's why it's called Thought Exchange, on each of these individual statements, and then they can see others who have weighed in on each of the thoughts as well, and rate them as to how they, how those ideas resonate with them. So we're in the process right now of working with the different superintendent advisories, our staff at each of the school sites, our parent groups, our PTAs, and our community. We did community advisory just recently. But we are also going to do a community group. It isn't something that we can just email out and say, here's the survey, take it. It really does need, because you have to use codes to get in, and it's 3 separate things. So if any of you in here are interested and haven't had the opportunity to participate, we haven't been at the high school yet for their PTA general meeting, so we'll be, hopefully we'll get lots of participation there as well. We will be doing a focus group on these 3 statements on Wednesday, May 22nd at 6 o'clock in the boardroom. We would ask that, and we'll be sending this out more broadly, but we do ask for RSVP because we need to know for space, and also for digital devices, because you can certainly do it with your cell phone, but we will provide devices for people to use as well. So it's good to know how many are going to be there, so we make sure we have enough for everyone. So you are all hopefully considering yourselves now invited May 22nd, 6 o'clock in our boardroom, unless it's a huge group, then we'll be somewhere else. But we're getting good feedback, and really did a lot of work on what is the latest educational research tell us, particularly about social, emotional, and academic development for our students? And I think these three statements really resonate with that. And in sitting and listening to Dr. Luther last week, it was for me quite an affirmation of the work that the board has done as we future plan for Mercer Island School District, and of course our students, our top priority. Any questions?
I have a question. So, quick question for you. Given the work that we just heard about earlier, in terms of behaviors and environment, in the Mercer Island School District, do you envision a big part of the core focus to be around mitigation of risky behaviors and the addressing of the environmental risks that you guys have already identified?
I think our focus being on the social emotional development of student and how that puzzle works with their academic development falls perfectly into certainly those risk factors, as well as the comments Cindy made around being kind and how do we work through those pieces, because we know that students who don't feel safe don't feel like they can learn. So both of those are things that we will consider, particularly in the implementation of the values, vision, and mission.
Any other questions or comments about that? Okay, then we'll move on to, oh, go ahead.
And
I knew it was somewhere.
And just to add, our core values, vision, and mission here affects everything on down. And we have right now 7 fundamentals that the board monitors and holds our superintendent accountable for that. And so this is kind of a little bit of a reset, and it's going to affect those fundamentals. And so to the extent that you see supporting the whole child, ensuring our school community is safe and supportive, that is reflective of many of our fundamentals right now, but it's just showing that's where we're putting emphasis in our school district. And it does come down to the ends monitoring that we do once a year and hold our superintendent accountable, and the administration brings qualitative and quantitative data to show that we're meeting those goals. So this really is important in terms of it outlines kind of the work that we do as a board.
And it also outlines the work for all of the school sites and departments that fall within the school district as well. And they are waiting patiently but anxiously for this work to be completed so they can then, for an example, in our technology, as a technology department in an educational institution, what is their vision and mission, and how does it fit within this? For each of the school site plans, this is always a consideration as they do their school site plans. And now I'm going to segue directly into the long-range facilities master plan, because one of the first things when you engage in that process is looking at your core values, vision, and mission statement as well. So we are in the very beginning stages of evaluating our current facilities. We've had sort of the very initial stage of a ranking and rating, not so much a ranking, but a rating of each of our facilities. OSPI, which is the government oversight for all of the public education system, has within their purview a ranking system that gives a score, a numeric score, to buildings based on age, safety, functionality of the building. So we started with that this year. We had a consultant engineering firm that came in and did that process for the board, which was kind of the very first chapter in the next steps of building facilities long-range plan that looks out more than 1 year, more than 2 years, out as much as 10 years. And so we are right now just closed the process of an RFQ for firms that the board will then evaluate as to who will guide us through the process, including, of course, lots and lots of community input, looking at the values, vision, and mission, and then looking at our current facilities, discussing our educational aspirations for our students, and then the logistics of our buildings and where the growth is and how is our capacity and facilities. So we have not even selected that firm yet, but it is at least a one-year process. So once that firm is selected, the plan would be to engage in that work starting in the fall at the beginning of the new school year. We work in school years. You tend to work in calendar years, but starting at the beginning of the school year and engaging in a 9 to 10, perhaps even 12-month process in developing this plan that would then come to the board for approval as well.
So question, is this plan being driven by a time horizon, meaning that approximate 6 years, or is it being driven by a comprehensive assessment of all school facilities, current and anticipated? Because I can imagine that, well, maybe I'm wrong, but the next 6 years is not going to be sufficient to address, what would look at the longevity of the entire set of assets that the district has. So is it time or is it total facilities?
I would say it's kind of both.
I think it's both. And I think it's important to kind of talk about the origin of this.
Maybe you can lean in a little more.
Yeah,
'cause I
talk
think-
about the origin of this, and if I misspeak, directors, correct me. We have 3.5 schools that are 60 years old. They have been remodeled at times, and we don't really have a plan right now of an ordered list of how to replace them or remodel them. But we know at some point they'll need to be addressed. And we also know, 2 projects, maybe 3 projects is a lot for a small district. And so it's likely not everything's going to be at one full swoop. And the thought would be, we know the status of the schools, assuming there's not any grade configuration changes, maybe this process that we go through, and they're professionals at this, and they're going to make us think about other things that I'm not speaking about. At a minimum, maybe we create an ordered list of what schools we're going to tackle first, because it's likely we're not going to be able to tackle all of them at first, and 65% of the voters don't have kids in school, so they're not necessarily going to be interested in that all of them are redone at the same time. So the thought would be, let's do a thorough analysis and get an ordered list in there so that the community then can get buy-into that list, and especially the community takes part in that list, because it's going to take a while if your number one school that is closest to your heart is not number one on the list. And it'd probably be better to kind of get buy into that before any type of decision by a board, this board, next board, 10 boards from now. So this is not dictating timing, this is just dictating a plan, per se. Does that make sense?
Just to piggyback on that, I'm curious if impacts like traffic and circulation would play into that would be not necessarily only the school related, but I'm thinking about our level of service at 53rd and Allecrest Way and the missing link and the bike infrastructure that is having a hard time getting through there. So I'm seeing some nods of heads. So.
When you're building a plan like this, all of those things are absolutely considered, but are also teased out in the community input involvement when those kind of concerns come forward as to, we feel we have a strong issue here. How do we mitigate that? Enrollment is a big factor, looking at enrollment and looking out as to where that enrollment is going to sit. Is it going to be Ty was talking about kindergarten, watching the kindergarten numbers right now. Is it going to be at the elementaries? Are we going to be at the high school? Certainly working with the city as well as to what kind of housing projects and developments could impact our schools and where our schools are located in facilities as well. So could it impact boundaries potentially again? Could that be part of the discussion? So there's lots of things that will come into play as we work through the process and the discussions.
So super quick follow-up. How do you project the first kind of entry into school, the preschool, kindergarten? Where do you get your data points? And is there anything that Islanders should or could be doing to be reporting little ones that are kind of close to enrollment?
So we get a lot of it from the birth rate at King County. Our demographer works with that, and so he gives us projections based on that. But we also use our trend lines as to where the students are trending in at. It's not perfect, but we've been pretty close. We had a blip last year where we had a pretty high influx of kindergartners that we hadn't anticipated. This year, enrollment-wise, we are spot on, which we certainly heave a huge sigh of relief with that, but we're pretty proud too, because many of our neighbors in the community who use the same demographer as us did not hit their enrollment targets this year. So there was kind of an interesting trend in our region as to enrollment not hitting where it was. Now, many of those districts have had real steep increases in their enrollment growth. Because Mercer Island is small and somewhat contained, our enrollment has stayed fairly level in its any kind of increases.
Okay, in our last few moments, are there any final questions, comments? Anything additional?
Thank you. Very helpful.
Thank you for being here. I think
Yeah, we have two, one in the fall, one in the...
the next time we'll get together is in October. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here tonight. It's so important, I think, for our two organizations to have these open, transparent conversations about how we're planning, how we're dealing with these speed bumps and everything. So the fact that you would take time out of your busy schedules to join us here and make sure that these linkage sessions happen, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll just quickly echo his thanks. And again, I would reiterate that Tuesday night, we will be going through a fairly substantial conversation regarding at least the short-term funding for those counselors. And I say that intentionally because there's so much passion in the community. So whether you can come or you want to sit at home and eat popcorn during that, please, we welcome your eyes, we welcome your comments. Thank you.
I just want to close by saying I have a graduating senior. Second and final kid is graduating this district, and I can't thank this community enough for helping me raise some great kids and send them off with confidence. So thank you for all our work, all collective work. It's a village. We share our boundaries, we share our jurisdictions, we share our resources, and we all share our families. So I'm grateful, and I appreciate y'all, and June is going to be really hard.
Is there anything that you need to do to close out the city council's portion?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay.
I mean, I can.
Well, then we will bring this session, the linkage session, to a close, and our official meeting will go to recess now for 10 minutes, and we will start back at 6 o'clock. And shortly after that, we'll take public input. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Appreciate it. It's good to see you.